On my wedding night, a massive truck slammed into our car. My husband Marcus died on impact. I survived, but barely. A week later, the police caught the driver who hit us. When that driver finally spoke in the interrogation room, my blood ran completely cold. He was not just a random driver who made a terrible mistake. He was hired by my own family. My name is Nia Sterling, and I am 32 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and treated you like a burden. The transition from the dark abyss of unconsciousness to the harsh reality of the intensive care unit at Emory University Hospital was not peaceful. It was a violent collision of senses. The rhythmic, relentless beeping of heart monitors echoed in my ears like a cruel countdown. The sharp, sterile smell of medical-grade bleach and rubbing alcohol burned my nostrils, failing to mask the faint metallic scent of my own dried blood. My body felt as though it had been crushed under the weight of a collapsing building. Every breath I took sent agonizing shockwaves through my fractured ribs. My left arm was immobilized in a heavy cast, and a thick bandage wrapped tightly around my skull, throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that made opening my eyes a monumental task. When I finally managed to flutter my eyelids open, the blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling forced me to squint. I was hooked up to a tangle of transparent intravenous tubes, fluids, and painkillers dripping steadily into my bruised veins. I tried to move to speak to call out for Marcus, but my throat was parched, feeling like it was lined with shattered glass. The memory of the crash flashed behind my eyes with terrifying clarity. The sudden blinding glare of headlights, the deafening crunch of twisting metal and shattering glass, the terrible, suffocating silence that followed. Marcus, my brilliant, loving husband. The man who had kissed me just minutes before, promising me a lifetime of happiness. He was gone. The doctors had told me during a brief moment of lucidity, hours or maybe days ago. He died instantly, they said, their voices full of professional pity. As I lay there trapped in a broken body and drowning in a sea of fresh, suffocating grief, the sound of a harsh, demanding voice pierced through the mechanical humming of the intensive care unit. It was not a voice offering comfort. It was not a voice choked with the sorrow of a mother seeing her widowed, shattered daughter. It was my mother, Brenda. Her voice, usually dripping with the artificial sweetness she used to charm the high society circles of Atlanta, was currently sharp and commanding. She was standing just outside my glass-paneled room, arguing aggressively with a tired-looking intensive care nurse. "I demand you hand it over right now," my mother snapped, her tone echoing down the quiet corridor. "That is my son-in-law's property. It belongs to the family. You have absolutely no right to withhold it." The nurse, maintaining her professional composure, replied softly but firmly. "Ma'am, I have already explained this to you 3 times. The personal effects recovered from the scene of the accident are currently in the possession of the police department as part of their ongoing vehicular homicide investigation. Even if we had it here, it is covered in biological material. It is covered in blood." "I do not care if it is covered in mud," my mother retorted, her voice rising in extreme irritation. "That is a solid gold Rolex Daytona. It is worth over $40,000. Do you know who I am? I am Brenda Sterling. You will go find the floor manager and get me that watch before it magically disappears into someone's pocket." I closed my eyes, a fresh tear tracking down my bruised cheek, burning like acid against my cuts. My husband was dead. His body was lying in a cold morgue. I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, hooked to machines keeping me stabilized. And my mother, the woman who had given birth to me, was outside my door screaming at a medical professional over a bloody piece of jewelry. She did not care about Marcus's life. She did not care if I was in physical agony. She only saw a $40,000 asset that she believed she was entitled to claim. The heavy glass door to my room slid open. My mother marched in, her face twisted in annoyance, completely ignoring the fact that I was awake and looking directly at her. She was dressed impeccably as always, wearing a tailored navy blue suit and her signature pearl necklace, her hair perfectly styled as if she were heading to a charity luncheon rather than an intensive care unit. Following closely behind her was my younger sister, Dominique. Dominique was 29, the undisputed golden child of our family, an aspiring social media influencer who cared more about her follower count than human decency. She walked into the room holding a designer coffee cup, looking around the sterile environment with clear disgust. "This place smells terrible," Dominique complained, wrinkling her perfectly contoured nose. She did not look at the monitors, the bandages, or my bruised face. Instead, she looked down at her own outfit. "Do you have any idea how much this has ruined my week, Nia? My custom bridesmaid dress from the reception is completely ruined. The dry cleaner said the bloodstains will never come out. That was a $3,000 dress, and now I cannot even post the photos from the reception because everything turned into a literal disaster." I stared at my sister, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of her narcissism. My husband had died in a violent, horrific crash on our wedding night, and she was complaining about a ruined dress and her inability to post aesthetic photos on the internet. Behind them stepped my father, Calvin. He was a prominent deacon at our local megachurch, a man who preached about grace, humility, and family values every Sunday morning while practicing none of them in his actual life. He wore a somber expression that I knew from years of experience was entirely fabricated. He walked to the foot of my bed, placed his hands together in a prayerful gesture, and bowed his head for exactly 3 seconds before looking up. "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away," Calvin announced, his deep baritone voice filling the room with hollow religious platitudes. "We must accept his mysterious ways, Nia. Marcus is in a better place now, and we must focus on the living. We must focus on the future of this family." I tried to speak, to tell them to leave, to ask them how they could be so incredibly callous, but my throat was too raw. I could only manage a weak, raspy cough. My mother finally stepped up to the side of my bed. She did not reach out to hold my uninjured hand. She did not stroke my hair or offer a single word of maternal comfort. Instead, she reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She dropped the paperwork directly onto my lap, the heavy thud of the paper landing on my bruised legs, sending a fresh spike of pain through my abdomen. "We do not have time for tears right now," Nia Brenda said coldly, pulling a silver pen from her purse and clicking it open. "We need to handle business. Marcus is dead, and crying will not bring him back. We spoke to his former employer. We know he had a life insurance policy worth $2 million. Since you are his wife, you are the primary beneficiary. I need you to sign this proxy right now to transfer the management of those funds directly to your father and me." I stared at the papers, my vision swimming. A life insurance proxy. They had brought legal documents to my hospital bed before my husband was even buried. I forced my raw throat to work. Why, I croaked the single word scraping against my vocal cords. "Because Trey is in trouble," Dominique answered immediately, stepping forward. Trey was her husband, my brother-in-law, a man who owned a luxury car dealership in Atlanta, but spent more time placing illegal bets than selling vehicles. "Trey's dealership is drowning in debt. He owes people a lot of money, Nia. Bad people. If he does not get a massive cash injection by the end of the month, they are going to take the dealership and our house. We need that $2 million. I looked at my mother, searching for any hint of shame, any sliver of humanity. There was absolutely none. "Sign the paper," Nia Brenda commanded, her eyes narrowing. "Marcus is gone. You have no children. You have a low-level administrative job. You live in a modest apartment. You do not need $2 million. You do not even know how to manage that kind of wealth. Your sister has a family, a certain lifestyle to maintain a public image. She and Trey need this money to survive. It is the absolute least you can do for your own flesh and blood." The audacity of her words hung in the sterile air, thick and suffocating. They were trying to rob a grieving widow in an intensive care bed to pay off the gambling debts of a failing car salesman. They looked at me with expectation, assuming I would simply fold and obey as they had forced me to do throughout my entire childhood. They saw me as the weak, unremarkable family scapegoat. They saw a quiet administrative assistant who made a modest salary. They believed they held all the power in this room. As I lay there trapped in my broken body, listening to my mother demand my dead husband's money, my grief suddenly morphed into something entirely different. It hardened. It crystallized into a cold, unbreakable resolve. What my greedy, status-obsessed parents and my vain, entitled sister did not know was that they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. They did not know that Marcus's life insurance policy was irrelevant. They did not know that I was not a struggling administrative assistant. I was the silent, hidden founder and billionaire chief executive officer of Sterling Holdings, a venture capital firm worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had funded Marcus's entire biotech career. I held the keys to an empire they could not even begin to fathom. And as I stared into my mother's cold, calculating eyes, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not just survive this tragedy. I would use every ounce of my hidden power, every dollar of my secret wealth, and every legal resource at my disposal to absolutely destroy the people standing in this room. They wanted to take everything from me in my darkest hour. I was going to let them think they had won right up until the moment I burned their entire world to the ground. I stared at the proxy document resting on my bruised legs. My mother thrust the silver pen closer to my face, her expression tightening into a mask of pure impatience. I let out a long, ragged breath and allowed my hand to tremble artificially as I pushed the paperwork back toward her. "I cannot sign anything right now," I whispered, letting my voice crack with feigned exhaustion. "My vision is too blurry to read the fine print and the pain medication is making me incredibly dizzy. You will have to leave it here. I will look at it when my head clears." Brenda snatched the paperwork back with a sharp huff of indignation. "Fine. But do not think you can ignore this, Nia. Trey is running out of time and this family will not be dragged down into bankruptcy just because you want to wallow in self-pity. We will be back tomorrow morning. Have it signed by then." She turned on her heel and marched out of the intensive care unit. Dominique followed her immediately, complaining loudly about the hospital cafeteria coffee as she exited. My father lingered for a brief second, offering another hollow, rehearsed prayer for my recovery, before trailing behind his wife and favorite daughter. The heavy glass door slid shut, leaving me in the quiet, mechanical embrace of the medical monitors. The moment they were completely out of sight, the trembling in my hands stopped entirely. The facade of the broken, helpless widow vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating precision. I reached for the call button to summon my nurse, but before my finger could press the plastic surface, the door opened again. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a rumpled gray suit stepped into the room. He held up a silver badge. "I am Detective Vance with the Fulton County Police Department," he announced, his voice raspy and exhausted. "I am truly sorry for your immense loss, Mrs. Sterling. I know this is a terrible time, but I need to speak with you regarding the crash that killed your husband." I adjusted my posture against the stiff hospital pillows, ignoring the sharp protests of my fractured ribs. "Please, Detective, tell me everything." He pulled up a sterile plastic chair and sat down heavily. "We caught the driver of the commercial truck that struck your vehicle. He fled the scene on foot, but we tracked him down at a cheap motel near the airport late last night. He is currently in custody at the county jail. We are charging him with vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of a fatal accident." A surge of adrenaline pumped through my battered veins. "Who is he? Was he drunk?" "That is where things get complicated," the detective replied, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "He was not under the influence of alcohol or narcotics. He has a lengthy criminal record, mostly low-level felonies, but his behavior during the interrogation was highly unusual. He kept demanding to speak with a lawyer, specifically claiming he had a wealthy relative in Atlanta who would post his bail and cover his legal fees. He refused to give us a name, but we are pulling his phone records now." I thanked the detective for the update, maintaining a perfectly composed exterior. He promised to keep me informed and left the room to speak with my attending physician. As soon as the door clicked shut, I reached for the emergency bedside telephone. I dialed a highly secure unlisted number that only 3 people in the world possessed. It connected directly to the private office of Jonathan Hayes, the ruthless, brilliant lead counsel for Sterling Holdings. Jonathan answered on the first ring. Nia, I received the alert about the crash. The entire executive board is devastated. I am mobilizing our private medical transport team to move you to a secure private facility right now. Cancel the transport, Jonathan, I commanded, my voice dropping to a sharp, authoritative whisper. I need to stay exactly where I am. Play the role of the ordinary grieving widow. I need you to do something far more important. The police arrested the truck driver who hit Marcus. He is being held at the Fulton County Jail. I want you to use every single contact, every ounce of leverage, and every political favor we possess in this city. I want the audio recording of that man's interrogation, and I want it in my hands within the hour. Do not leave any digital footprints. Understood, Madam CEO. Jonathan replied instantly, shifting into crisis management mode. Consider it done. 45 minutes later, a young man dressed in the uniform of a hospital courier entered my room. He handed me a sealed manila envelope, nodded silently, and departed. Inside the envelope was a sleek encrypted digital tablet and a pair of wireless earbuds. Jonathan had delivered on his promise. I placed the earbuds in my ears, my hands moving with steady, terrifying calm. I tapped the screen, entering my biometric passcode, and opened the single audio file displayed on the dashboard. The recording began with the harsh, echoing sounds of a concrete interrogation room. I heard the scrape of a metal chair being dragged across the floor. A police officer began questioning the suspect, asking for his full legal name and his reasons for fleeing the crash site. For the first several minutes, the driver gave nothing but defiant, arrogant responses. He laughed at the threat of prison time. Then the tone of the interrogation shifted. The lead investigator presented physical evidence linking the driver to the stolen commercial truck used in the collision. The detective outlined the severe minimum sentencing guidelines for vehicular homicide in the state of Georgia. The arrogant laughter stopped abruptly. I heard the distinct sound of a man panicking. "You cannot put this all on me," the driver shouted, his voice cracking with sudden desperate fear. "This was not a random accident. I was hired. I was paid to do a job. You need to call my cousin. He is a prominent businessman in Buckhead. He owns a luxury car dealership. He told me the plan was foolproof." My breath caught in my throat. My heart monitor began to beep faster, the green lines spiking violently across the digital display. "Who is your cousin?" the interrogator demanded, slamming a hand onto the table. "Give me a name right now." Trey, the driver, cried out. "Trey Washington. He is married to some rich girl named Dominique. He came to me 2 weeks ago. He was sweating, terrified about some massive gambling debts he owed to some very dangerous people. He said his brother-in-law, Marcus, had just finalized a massive $50 million corporate contract. Trey said if Marcus died on his wedding night, the money would automatically default to the new wife. He said the wife was weak, completely controlled by her family, and that his mother-in-law already had a plan to force her to sign over the entire estate. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping, not of sorrow, but of absolute consuming rage. The audio file ended, leaving me in a deafening, ringing silence. I pulled the earbuds out, my hands gripping the crisp white hospital sheets until my knuckles turned stark white. My chest heaved as I struggled to pull oxygen into my bruised lungs. It was a hit. The tragic accident that had ripped the love of my life away from me was not a twist of cruel fate. It was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination orchestrated by my own brother-in-law. Trey had murdered Marcus to pay off his underground gambling debts. But the horror did not stop with Trey. The driver's confession echoed in my mind. Trey had confidently stated that my mother already had a plan to force me to sign over the estate. Brenda knew. Whether she knew about the murder plot beforehand, or simply saw an opportunity the moment she heard Marcus was dead, she was entirely complicit in the theft of a dead man's legacy. My father, the righteous church deacon, stood right beside her, cloaking their bottomless greed in the Holy Scripture. Dominique, my vein-spoiled sister, was furious about a ruined bridesmaid dress, while her husband's hands were drenched in the blood of my husband. They all knew. They were all circling my hospital bed like starving vultures, eager to pick the meat from my bones before Marcus was even buried. They thought I was a pathetic, grieving pawn. They thought they could easily manipulate me into signing away my life, my wealth, and my future to save a murderer from his own financial ruin. I carefully slipped the encrypted tablet back into the manila envelope and slid it beneath my mattress. The intense, agonizing physical pain radiating from my fractured ribs and broken arm suddenly felt completely irrelevant. The grief that had been suffocating me just hours ago was incinerated by a blazing, unstoppable inferno of vengeance. Trey wanted a massive payout. Dominique wanted to maintain her luxurious facade. Brenda and Calvin wanted to secure their high society status using my tragedy as their personal bank account. They had absolutely no idea that the man they murdered was not the source of the wealth they sought. Marcus was a brilliant scientist, but the money, the power, and the empire belonged entirely to me. I looked at the blank wall of my hospital room, formulating the blueprint of their destruction. I would not hand this tape over to the police immediately. If Trey was arrested today, the rest of the family would simply play the victims. They would feign ignorance, hire expensive defense attorneys, and distance themselves from the crime. That was entirely unacceptable. They all needed to suffer. They needed to feel the absolute terror of losing everything they valued. I wanted to systematically strip away their money, their homes, their public reputations, and their freedom. I wanted them to experience a total, inescapable ruin. The hospital door remained closed, sealing me in my quiet fortress of strategy. I reached for the telephone once more, pressing the direct line to my chief financial officer. The time for grieving would come later. Right now, it was time to go to war. The heavy wooden door to my hospital room swung open, breaking the sterile silence I had carefully cultivated. I immediately let my hand drop from the telephone receiver, allowing my shoulders to slump against the stiff mattress. The fierce, burning energy that had coursed through my veins just seconds ago vanished, replaced by the fragile, trembling demeanor of a broken widow. My mother, Brenda, marched back into the room, followed closely by my father, Calvin, my sister, Dominique, and her husband, Trey. Trey, the man who had just orchestrated the violent murder of my husband, wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and an expression of manufactured grief. He looked like an upstanding citizen, a supportive brother-in-law, a pillar of the Atlanta high society community. Knowing what he had truly done made the sight of his polished exterior physically nauseating. I forced a weak, ragged breath, letting a single tear slip down my bruised cheek. "I am so terribly tired," I whispered, ensuring my voice sounded appropriately hollow and defeated. "Everything hurts so much. I just want Marcus back." My father stepped forward, adopting his signature pastoral tone. "The Lord tests those he loves most, Nia. We must remain strong in the face of this dark adversity." He placed a hand over his heart, looking at me with eyes that held absolutely no genuine warmth or fatherly compassion. "We were going to stay here and pray with you, but the doctor advised us that you need uninterrupted rest. The medical staff insists on keeping your room completely clear for the next few hours to monitor your vitals properly." I knew that was a blatant lie. Dr. Chen had explicitly asked if I had anyone to sit with me during the night. My family simply could not bear to stay in a depressing hospital room when there were much better things to do. They were treating me exactly as they always had, ignoring my pain and prioritizing their own comfort. Dominique checked her diamond-encrusted watch, sighing heavily. "Yes, and honestly, the fluorescent lighting in here is giving me a massive migraine. Plus, Trey and I have dinner reservations at Chop's Lobster Bar in Buckhead. We cannot exactly cancel at the last minute. The cancellation fee alone is completely outrageous. We need to eat, Nia. We have to keep our physical strength up for the stressful funeral preparations." Of course, I murmured, keeping my eyes downcast. You should go. Enjoy your dinner. Brenda patted the foot of my bed, completely avoiding my injured arm and my bandaged head. We will handle all the funeral arrangements, Nia. Do not worry your pretty little head about the expensive costs. Your father and I will advance the money for a beautiful, elegant service at our church. We can settle the financial details later once you sign the life insurance proxy I showed you. Just rest tonight. We will be back tomorrow morning. They filed out of the hospital room with an eager, almost celebratory pace. A grieving family abandoning their widowed, critically injured daughter in an intensive care unit so they could enjoy a five-star steakhouse dinner in the most affluent neighborhood in Atlanta. As the door clicked shut, I stared at the ceiling, feeling a cold, calculating calm wash over my entire body. They were celebrating a financial victory they had not actually won. I reached under my mattress and retrieved the encrypted digital tablet my legal team had delivered earlier. I tapped the secure communication application and initiated a video call with Elias Vance, the brilliant, ruthless chief financial officer of Sterling Holdings. Elias was a sharp, meticulous man who had been my right hand since I founded the venture capital firm. He knew my deepest secrets, my aggressive business strategies, and the true staggering extent of my wealth. The screen flared to life, revealing Elias sitting in his high-rise office overlooking the downtown Atlanta skyline. His expression was grim, his eyes reflecting genuine sorrow. Nia, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I cannot even begin to express how sorry I am for your loss. Marcus was a visionary. He was a genuinely good man. We are all ready to do whatever you need during this tragedy. I appreciate that, Elias. I replied, my voice steady and commanding. I dropped the fragile widow act completely. The woman speaking to him now was the billionaire chief executive who controlled a massive financial empire. But we do not have time for condolences today. Marcus was murdered. Elias froze, his eyes widening in sheer shock. Murdered, Nia? What are you talking about? Did the police find something at the crash site? I sent you an encrypted audio file 5 minutes ago, I said. It is the official police interrogation of the truck driver. The driver was hired by Trey. My brother-in-law ordered the hit on my husband to secure a massive life insurance payout to cover his underground gambling debts, and the rest of my family is circling like vultures waiting to strip my estate bare while Marcus is barely cold. I watched Elias process the horrifying information. The shock on his face rapidly transformed into the same cold, burning rage that fueled my every breath. I will contact the authorities immediately, Elias stated firmly, reaching for his desk phone. We will have him arrested before he even finishes his appetizer at Chops. No, I commanded sharply. Stop right there, Elias. Do not call the police. Do not contact the district attorney yet. If we arrest Trey tonight, the rest of my family will simply play the innocent victims. They will claim they knew absolutely nothing about the plot. They will hire expensive defense lawyers, distance themselves from Trey entirely, and walk away clean. That is absolutely unacceptable. They are all complicit in this boundless greed. They all wanted a piece of my tragedy. I want to utterly destroy them, Elias. I want to strip them of everything they value, their money, their status, their precious social standing in Atlanta high society. I want them completely ruined. Elias leaned back in his leather executive chair, a fierce, predatory gleam appearing in his eyes. He understood exactly what I was demanding. I am listening, Madam CEO. Give me your orders. I want you to initiate a hostile financial takeover of my entire family. I instructed, my mind working with surgical precision. Let us start with Trey. His luxury car dealership is failing miserably. He owes money to dangerous loan sharks, but he also has massive legitimate commercial debt. Find out exactly which banks hold the mortgages on his dealership properties and his inventory lines of credit. I want Sterling Holdings to purchase that debt quietly through our subsidiary corporations. Buy it all. I want to personally own every single cent that man owes. Elias began typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. Trey's dealership is heavily leveraged through a regional Georgia bank. I can have our corporate acquisitions team approach them tomorrow morning. We can buy the debt at a premium to ensure they sell immediately without asking any questions. Once we hold the paper, we can call the commercial loans due immediately upon any minor breach of contract. Make it happen, I ordered. Now on to my parents. Calvin and Brenda live in a massive estate in Alpharetta. They love parading that house around as proof of their divine blessings and superior status. But I know my mother's reckless spending habits. I know she has been secretly remortgaging that property for years to fund Dominique's designer lifestyle and maintain their exclusive country club memberships. Find their primary mortgage lender. Buy their mortgage. Buy any outstanding personal loans, equity lines of credit, or business debts associated with my father's church leadership. Consider it done, Elias said, his fingers flying across the keys. I will deploy 3 separate shell companies to acquire their assets. They will never trace the purchases back to Sterling Holdings. We will hold the financial noose completely out of sight until you are ready to pull it tight. Finally, look into Dominique. I continued, my voice dripping with absolute disdain. She portrays herself as a wealthy socialite online, but her entire life is funded by maxed-out credit cards and my parents' dwindling bank accounts. Find out exactly who issues her credit, buy the debt if possible, or simply prepare a comprehensive dossier on her financial fraud. I want to know exactly how much she owes, and to whom she owes it. Elias nodded, his expression dark and incredibly focused. I will have a complete financial autopsy on your entire family by tomorrow evening. We will own their homes, their businesses, and their credit lines. They will not be able to buy a simple cup of coffee without your silent permission. How do you want to handle the immediate situation? They expect you to sign that life insurance proxy tomorrow morning. Let them think they are winning, I replied, a cold smile touching my bruised lips. I will play the traumatized, helpless victim perfectly. I will let them plan their lavish, hypocritical funeral. I will let Trey think he has successfully secured his bloody payout. The higher they climb on their mountain of arrogance, the more devastating their inevitable fall will be. Just ensure the financial traps are set and fully legally binding. When the time comes, I want the eviction notices and foreclosure documents ready to serve. You have my absolute word, Nia, Elias promised softly. They took Marcus from us. We will take their entire world. I ended the video call and slipped the encrypted tablet back under my hospital mattress. The intense, agonizing physical pain in my fractured ribs and broken arm was still present, but it felt remarkably distant now, muted by the sheer power of my impending vengeance. My family was currently sitting in a luxurious restaurant, sipping expensive champagne, laughing and planning exactly how to spend the money they believed they would extract from my dead husband's estate. They were toasting to their grand success, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just been sold to the woman they had underestimated their entire lives. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a quiet moment to think of Marcus. I pictured his warm smile, his brilliant mind, the way he always held my hand when we walked through Piedmont Park on Sunday afternoons. He had loved me unconditionally, knowing all my secrets, protecting my peace, and encouraging my massive corporate ambitions. He had been my safe harbor in a world filled with toxic, greedy relatives. They had stolen him from me for a financial payout that did not even exist. They had destroyed my beautiful future for a luxury car dealership and a closet full of designer bags. I took a deep, steadying breath, the sterile hospital air filling my bruised lungs. The silent strike had officially begun. I would let them enjoy their lobster and their expensive champagne tonight. I would let them sleep soundly in their expensive, heavily mortgaged beds, because very soon the financial noose I had just tied would snap brutally tight around their necks. And when it did, I would not offer them a single ounce of mercy. I would watch their high society kingdom crumble into dust, and I would do it without shedding another tear. The war was in motion, and I was going to win. The heavy oak doors of Greater Grace Fellowship swung open, revealing a sanctuary that looked more like a luxury concert hall than a place of solemn worship. My father, Calvin, had built this megachurch in the heart of Atlanta, using a potent mixture of charismatic preaching and relentless financial manipulation. Today, he was using it to turn my husband's funeral into a high society networking event. I sat in a specialized medical wheelchair at the front of the sanctuary, my broken arm resting in a dark sling, my ribs wrapped tightly beneath a modest black dress. The physical pain was a dull roar compared to the sharp, focused rage burning in my chest. I kept my head bowed, playing the role of the shattered, helpless widow they all expected to see. The massive sanctuary was packed with Atlanta's elite. Local politicians, wealthy business owners, and prominent socialites filled the padded pews, whispering their hollow condolences. They were not here to mourn Marcus. They were here to be seen by my father and to stroke my mother's boundless ego. My sister Dominique sat in the front row, treating the funeral like a fashion runway. She wore a custom-tailored black velvet dress that clung to her curves, paired with impossibly high Christian Louboutin heels and a dramatic lace veil that obscured her face just enough to look tragically glamorous. As the choir sang a mournful hymn, Dominique leaned heavily against her husband Trey, her shoulders shaking with loud theatrical sobs. She occasionally lifted her veil to dab at completely dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. When wealthy church elders approached our pew to offer their respects, Dominique skillfully intercepted them. She clutched their hands, whispering about the terrible financial burden this sudden tragedy had placed on the family. I watched in silent disgust as church members subtly pressed thick envelopes of cash and discreet checks into her manicured hands. She was actively collecting love offerings off the corpse of the man her husband had murdered. She slipped the envelopes into her quilted Chanel handbag with practiced efficiency, never breaking her performance of the devastated sister-in-law. My mother Brenda stood near the pulpit, directing the funeral director and the ushers like an event planner organizing a corporate gala. She ensured the expensive floral arrangements were perfectly positioned for the live broadcast cameras that streamed my father's services. When she looked at me, her eyes were completely devoid of maternal sympathy. She only offered a tight warning nod, a silent command for me to maintain my quiet, compliant posture. Then my father took the stage. Calvin gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium, his deep baritone voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. He delivered a booming, hypocritical sermon about Marcus, a man he had constantly belittled in life for choosing scientific research over lucrative business ventures. Calvin painted himself as a loving father figure who had guided Marcus, weaving scripture and lies into a seamless performance designed to extract maximum sympathy and maximum donations from the congregation. I stared at the polished mahogany casket resting in front of the altar, focusing all my energy on keeping my breathing steady. I promised Marcus I would avenge him, and part of that promise required me to sit through this sickening circus without breaking character. Following the burial at a prestigious Buckhead cemetery, the congregation transitioned to the church's massive fellowship hall for the repast. The room buzzed with the clinking of fine silverware and the hum of networking conversations. The air smelled of catered Southern cuisine and expensive perfumes. I was positioned in a corner chair, surrounded by a constant stream of strangers, offering meaningless platitudes. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes downcast, clutching a crumpled tissue. Dominique and Brenda were across the room, holding court near the buffet line. They laughed softly with a local real estate developer, their grief magically forgotten in the presence of wealth and status. I noticed Trey hovering near the edges of the room. He wore a sharp black suit, sipping from a crystal glass, his eyes darting nervously around the hall. The financial pressure from his failing dealership and his underground gambling debts was clearly eating away at him. He needed the life insurance payout, and he needed it immediately. I signaled to a church usher that I needed to use the restroom, wheeling myself slowly out of the crowded, noisy fellowship hall and into the dimly lit, quiet administrative corridor of the church. The thick carpets muffled the sound of my wheels. I needed a moment of silence to clear my head and prepare for the next phase of my plan. As I reached the heavy wooden door of the restroom, a strong hand suddenly gripped the handles of my wheelchair, stopping me dead in my tracks. I spun my head around, wincing as the sudden movement pulled at my bruised neck. Trey stood towering over me in the shadowy hallway. His handsome, charismatic face had twisted into a cold, menacing sneer. The mask of the supportive brother-in-law had slipped completely, revealing the ruthless, desperate murderer underneath. Nia, we need to have a serious conversation right now. Trey growled, his voice a harsh, aggressive whisper that echoed off the quiet walls. He forcefully pushed my wheelchair away from the restroom door and backed me into a dark alcove out of sight from the main hallway. Trey, please, you are hurting me, I whimpered deliberately, shrinking back into my seat and making my voice tremble with fabricated fear. I just want to use the restroom. I am so tired. You do not have time to be tired, Nia, he snapped, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee and aggressive cologne clinging to his suit. You are acting like a helpless child, and this family cannot afford your pathetic weakness right now. Marcus is dead. Your life has completely changed, and you are clearly not in your right mind to handle the massive responsibilities he left behind. I clutched my cast, forcing my eyes to widen in mock terror. What are you talking about, Trey? I am just trying to grieve my husband. Grieving does not pay the bills, Nia, he hissed, slamming his hand against the wall next to my head. His eyes were wide, frantic, and filled with a dangerous, calculating energy. Do you have any idea how much debt Marcus probably left you? Do you even know how to manage an estate? You are a low-level assistant. You have never handled real money in your entire life. Brenda and Calvin are exhausted trying to carry you through this mess. I am stepping up to fix it. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a folded legal document, shoving it roughly onto my lap. The paper felt heavy against my injured legs. What is this? I asked, my voice quivering perfectly. It is a temporary estate control agreement, Trey demanded, tapping the paper with a thick finger. It grants me immediate legal authority to manage Marcus's financial accounts, deal with the life insurance policies, and handle the creditors, so you can just sit here and cry in your wheelchair. It takes the burden completely off your shoulders. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line. I looked down at the document, maintaining my terrified facade, while my brilliant legal mind instantly scanned the bold print. It was a broad power of attorney designed to give him total unchecked access to whatever he believed Marcus owned. It was a sloppy, desperate legal maneuver, drafted by someone who needed cash yesterday. I cannot sign this without reading it, Trey, I stuttered, looking up at him with pleading eyes. I need to talk to a lawyer. I need to ask my parents. Trey leaned in even closer, the aggression in his posture escalating into an undeniable threat. You do not need a lawyer, Nia. You need protection. You are a wealthy widow now living all alone in a city that is notoriously unforgiving. Atlanta is a very dangerous place for a woman by herself. He paused, letting the dark, menacing implication hang heavily in the quiet hallway. The man who had hired a truck driver to crush my husband to death was now explicitly threatening my life. Tragic accidents happen every single day, Nia. He continued, his voice dropping to a chilling, smooth cadence. People get hurt. People disappear. You are broken, vulnerable, and completely defenseless. If you do not let me handle your business, who knows what kind of terrible things could happen to you next? Do you really want to risk finding out? I stared into his desperate, greedy eyes. He thought he was intimidating a weak, clueless victim. He thought his veiled threats would break my spirit and force me into submission. He had absolutely no idea that I had already listened to the interrogation tape. He had no idea that I knew he was a murderer. And most importantly, he had no idea that my corporate attorneys were currently structuring a financial trap so devastating it would obliterate his entire existence. Please, Trey, I sobbed, letting a few tears spill over my lashes. Do not be angry with me. I am just so scared. I do not know what to do without Marcus. Then do exactly what I am telling you to do, he commanded, his lips curling into a triumphant, predatory smile. He thought he had won. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek silver pen, clicking it open and pressing it into my uninjured hand. Sign the paper, Nia. Let your big brother take care of everything. I promise you, once you sign this, all your problems will magically disappear. I looked down at the pen in my trembling hand, then back up at the man who had ordered the hit on my husband. I swallowed hard, acting as though his aggressive gaslighting had completely shattered my resolve. I let out a defeated sigh, allowing my shoulders to collapse inward. I will sign it, I whispered, my voice completely broken. But I cannot do it right here in the dark. I need to go back to my house. Bring the papers to my house tomorrow morning. I will sign whatever you want. Just please leave me alone right now. Trey stared at me for a long, tense moment, assessing whether my submission was genuine. His arrogant, greedy nature blinded him to any possibility of deception. He smirked, snatching the document back from my lap and tucking it into his jacket. Fine. Tomorrow morning at your house. Do not try anything stupid, Nia. Remember what I said about how dangerous things can be. He turned and walked away, his expensive leather shoes echoing down the hallway as he headed back toward the bright lights and wealthy donors of the fellowship hall. I sat alone in the shadows of the administrative corridor, the tears instantly drying on my face. The trembling in my hand vanished. I slowly gripped the armrests of my wheelchair, a dark, lethal calmness washing over my entire being. Trey wanted control of Marcus's estate. He wanted to drain the phantom accounts to save his miserable, pathetic life. Tomorrow morning, I was going to hand him a legal document that would seal his ultimate destruction. The vultures had gathered to feast on my grief, but they were about to discover they had walked straight into a slaughterhouse. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my living room, casting long, pale shadows across the hardwood floor. I sat on my plush velvet sofa wearing an oversized faded gray sweater that made my frame look small and fragile. My arm was still secured in its dark sling. My head throbbed, but I refused to take the prescribed pain medication. I needed my mind razor sharp. On the glass coffee table in front of me sat a stack of freshly printed legal documents. They had been delivered at dawn by a discreet courier sent from Jonathan Hayes, my lead corporate counsel. The papers looked incredibly standard, featuring boilerplate language about estate administration and financial proxies. But beneath that boring legal jargon lay a masterfully crafted trap. Jonathan and his team of elite attorneys had worked entirely through the night to build a financial landmine. Marcus had a shell company, a defunct research entity called Zenith Biolabs. My venture capital firm Sterling Holdings had recently injected a $10 million commercial loan into that shell company to fund future equipment purchases. The loan had strict personal liability clauses. The documents resting on my coffee table were designed to transfer the full management of Marcus's estate to Trey. However, buried deeply in Section 4, subsection C, was an assumption of debt clause. By signing the agreement to gain access to the life insurance and bank accounts, Trey would legally irrevocably bind himself as the sole personal guarantor of that $10 million loan. And because my company owned the debt, I would personally hold the power to demand immediate repayment. Right on schedule, the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the quiet house. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward, and assumed the posture of a terrified, exhausted widow. I shuffled slowly to the foyer and unlocked the door. Trey marched inside without waiting for an invitation. He was followed immediately by my sister Dominique, my mother Brenda, and my father Calvin. They moved into my home like a conquering army. Dominique did not even bother to say good morning. She immediately walked into my open-plan kitchen, opened the stainless steel refrigerator, and scoffed. "You have absolutely nothing to eat in here, Nia," she complained, pouring herself a glass of imported sparkling water. "How are you supposed to recover if you do not even stock your own fridge? You really cannot handle basic adult tasks right now." "I just have not had the energy to go to the grocery store," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "My chest hurts too much to drive." Brenda sighed dramatically, dropping her designer handbag onto my pristine kitchen counter. This is exactly why we are here, Nia. You are completely falling apart. You need your family to step in and manage your life before you lose everything. Marcus would have wanted us to protect you. Calvin nodded in solemn agreement, taking a seat on my expensive leather armchair as if he owned the property. The Lord commands us to care for the widows in their distress. He preached, his deep voice filling my living room. We are here to lift this heavy financial burden from your shoulders so you can focus entirely on your spiritual healing. Trey did not waste time with religious platitudes. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, walked over to the coffee table, and stood towering over me. I brought the paperwork we discussed yesterday at the church, he said, pulling a folded document from his inner pocket. It is a standard power of attorney. It gives me the right to speak to the life insurance company, access the bank accounts, and handle all the outstanding medical bills from the crash. All you have to do is sign your name right here at the bottom. I looked at the piece of paper he threw onto the glass table. It was a crude, generic form he had likely printed from the internet. I let my lower lip tremble, bringing a hand up to touch the bandage on my head. Trey, I said, letting a few tears spill over my eyelashes. I appreciate you wanting to help me. I really do. But the hospital social worker told me I had to be very careful about signing generic forms. She said Marcus had some complicated business accounts related to his biotech research. She actually gave me a contact for a free legal aid clinic yesterday. They sent over this specific estate management agreement this morning. I gestured weakly toward the thick stack of papers Jonathan had prepared. I pushed them slightly toward Trey. The legal aid lawyer said this document does the exact same thing you want. It gives you total control over the estate, the bank accounts, and the insurance payouts. But it also officially registers you as the estate manager with the state of Georgia, which protects me from being sued by any of Marcus's business creditors. The lawyer said if I do not use this specific state form, the hospital might come after my personal apartment for the medical bills. Trey stared at the thick stack of paper, his jaw clenching in irritation. I do not have time to read a 50-page legal novel, Nia. I have a business to run. I have investors breathing down my neck. Just sign my paper. Dominique walked into the living room, rolling her eyes. Oh my God, Nia, stop being so incredibly difficult. Trey is offering to save you from bankruptcy. Just sign his paper so we can leave. I have a nail appointment in an hour. I shrank back into the sofa cushions, pulling my knees up to my chest. I cannot, I sobbed, my voice breaking perfectly. The free lawyer terrified me. He said Marcus owed a lot of money for his laboratory equipment. If I sign a generic form, I could go to jail for fraud. Please, Trey. This document gives you everything you asked for. It gives you total access to the $2 million insurance policy. It just legally transfers the business liabilities to the estate manager so the creditors leave me alone. Please, I am just so scared. Brenda stepped forward, her eyes flashing with greedy impatience. She snatched the thick document from the table and flipped directly to the signature page. She did not bother to read a single clause. She only saw the words, estate control and insurance beneficiary transfer. Trey, just sign the stupid thing, Brenda commanded, shoving the document against his chest. It gives you the control you need to process the payout. The girl is clearly having a mental breakdown. She is paranoid and delusional from the pain medication. Let her have her silly state-mandated form so we can get this moving. The bank is calling your dealership every single morning. We need that cash flow initiated today. Calvin nodded his agreement. Listen to your mother-in-law, Trey. The Lord provides a path, but we must be the ones to walk down it. If this document grants you the administrative power to secure the family's financial future, then the minor legal details are irrelevant. Trey looked at my parents, then looked down at me, shivering on the sofa. His arrogance completely blinded him to the possibility of a trap. He truly believed I was a pathetic, terrified woman clinging to a free legal aid document out of sheer paranoia. He believed he was the smartest person in the room, outmaneuvering a weak widow. Fine, Trey spat, grabbing the silver pen resting on the table. You always have to make things so much harder than they need to be, Nia. This is exactly why Marcus was stressed out all the time. He flipped to the back of the packet. He did not read Section 4. He did not read subsection C. He did not see the $10 million liability clause attached to Zenith Biolabs. He simply pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled his signature across the bottom line. He flipped to the next page and signed again. He initialed the debt assumption paragraph without even glancing at the bold print. There, Trey said, throwing the silver pen down on the glass table, "I am the legal estate manager. The life policy routes directly to an administrative account I control. I will handle the creditors and the banks. You just sit here and rest." I reached forward with a shaking hand, picked up the pen, and countersigned the document. As the ink dried on the page, the trap snapped shut. Trey Washington had legally adopted $10 million of corporate debt payable immediately to Sterling Holdings. The celebration started immediately. They cheered happily, hugging each other while I watched silently. Dominique smiled proudly, touching her designer purse. "We are rich!" "Trey," she laughed, spinning around. Brenda looked extremely relieved, wiping a fake tear away as Calvin praised the Lord loudly. 4 days passed since that sickening celebration in my living room. My physical wounds were slowly knitting themselves together. The fractured ribs ached with a duller rhythm, and the heavy bandage on my head had been replaced with a discreet dressing. However, my mind had never been sharper. I spent those 4 days locked inside my home office, coordinating silently with Elias and Jonathan. We were monitoring Trey's frantic, doomed attempts to access Marcus's empty accounts. Trey was currently fighting through a labyrinth of banking delays my legal team had deliberately constructed. He thought he was days away from a massive payout. He had no idea he was suffocating in a financial vacuum. It was a rainy Thursday morning when the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded again. I was not expecting any couriers, and my private security team stationed discreetly in an unmarked vehicle down the street sent a rapid text message to my secure device. "Family approaching. 4 individuals. 1 unknown male." I took a steadying breath, slipped my phone into the pocket of my oversized cardigan, and walked to the foyer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. My mother Brenda pushed past me immediately, her expensive perfume filling the entryway with a suffocating floral cloud. She was followed by my father Calvin, clutching his leather-bound Bible, and my sister Dominique, who was busy scrolling on her phone, chewing loudly on a piece of gum. Bringing up the rear was a short, balding man in a poorly fitted, shiny gray suit carrying a scuffed leather briefcase. He looked exactly like the kind of bottom-feeding attorney who chased ambulances and handled dirty, under-the-table evictions for slumlords across Atlanta. "What are you all doing here?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble with perfectly calibrated anxiety. "I told you I needed rest." Brenda turned to face me, her expression a terrifying mask of manufactured maternal concern. Her eyes were hard and flat, completely devoid of empathy. "We know you need rest, Nia," she said smoothly, removing her designer sunglasses and folding them carefully. "That is exactly why we brought Mr. Sterling here. No, excuse me, this is Mr. Arthur Vance, a legal specialist in family welfare. We are stepping in to save you from yourself." The lawyer. Mr. Vance offered a slick, unsettling smile that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Sterling?" He began, his voice dripping with condescension as he wiped his damp shoes on my pristine welcome mat. "Your family has expressed deep, pressing concerns regarding your mental state following the tragic accident that claimed your husband's life. We are here to execute a necessary legal intervention to ensure your ongoing safety and financial stability." I stepped back, clutching my injured arm tightly against my chest, playing the terrified prey to absolute perfection. "What intervention? Trey is already handling the estate. What more do you possibly want from me?" Dominique finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes as if my trauma was a massive inconvenience to her morning schedule. "Oh, please, Nia, stop acting so oblivious. You are completely losing your mind." Mom found a doctor who reviewed your hospital charts and agreed that you are a danger to yourself. You cannot even manage a grocery run, let alone your own life. We are taking over everything. Mr. Vance unclasped his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers bearing the official seal of the Fulton County Probate Court. He slapped them onto my entryway console. These are sworn medical affidavits from a licensed psychiatric professional, he announced proudly, tapping the top page with a thick, stubby finger. Dr. Eris Thorne has determined that you are suffering from severe debilitating psychosis, an acute post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from the vehicular collision. You are currently classified as mentally incapacitated and completely unfit to manage your personal, medical, or financial affairs. I stared at the fraudulent documents, genuine shock momentarily breaking through my carefully constructed facade. I have never met a Dr. Eris Thorne in my entire life, I protested, my voice rising in deliberate panic. I was evaluated by the trauma team at Emory University Hospital. They cleared my cognitive functions before they discharged me. You cannot just invent a medical diagnosis to declare me insane. Mr. Vance chuckled, a greasy, condescending sound. We do not have to invent anything, Mrs. Sterling. Dr. Thorne is a highly respected professional in the Fulton County medical community. His affidavit details your erratic behavior, your refusal to take prescribed pain medication, and your unhealthy obsession with your late husband's business affairs. The judge has already reviewed the preliminary filing. In the eyes of the law, you are currently entirely incompetent. Your signature on any document is officially worthless, and your ability to make decisions has been revoked for your own safety. My father stepped forward, opening his Bible and placing a heavy, imposing hand on my shoulder. His grip was painfully tight, digging into my bruised collarbone. The devil plays tricks on the broken mind, Nia. He preached, his voice echoing in my own foyer like a judge delivering a death sentence. You are drowning in a sea of grief and delusion. The Lord commands the strong to protect the weak. We have filed an emergency petition for a full permanent conservatorship. Your mother and I will be granted absolute legal guardianship over your person and your estate. A conservatorship. The sheer breathtaking evil of their plan washed over me. They were trying to pull a legal maneuver designed for the elderly with severe dementia or individuals with catastrophic brain injuries. They wanted to strip me of my fundamental human rights. If the court granted this petition, I would not be able to vote, sign a contract, access a bank account, or even choose my own medical treatment without Brenda and Calvin's explicit permission. They intended to lock me in a gilded cage and drain whatever assets they believed I possessed, leaving me a permanent prisoner to their boundless greed. This is not about protecting me, I cried out, backing away from my father's oppressive grip and stumbling against the staircase railing. This is about control. You just want to make sure I never touch a single dime of Marcus's money. You want to make sure I am completely dependent on you forever, so you can siphon off my inheritance to pay for Dominique's luxurious lifestyle. Brenda laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held zero warmth. You have always been ungrateful, Nia. Ever since you were a little girl, you fought against my guidance. I had to spend thousands of dollars on tutors and counselors just to get you through college, while your sister excelled effortlessly. You have always been broken. Now the trauma has simply shattered you completely. Mr. Vance has already filed the emergency injunction with the probate judge. If you fight us, we will have you forcibly committed to a psychiatric ward pending the trial. We will have men in white coats drag you out of this house in a straitjacket. Is that the public spectacle you want? I looked from Brenda's cold, triumphant face to Calvin's hypocritical, solemn expression. Dominique was already losing interest in the conversation, her eyes wandering toward the expensive artwork hanging in my hallway. They were truly willing to destroy my entire life, to label me insane, and strip away my freedom just to get their hands on a payout they believed existed. They were perfectly comfortable locking their own flesh and blood in a mental institution to secure their financial status in Atlanta society. The sheer audacity of their ambush was staggering. They had hired a corrupt lawyer and paid off a shady doctor to forge medical records, completely confident that I was too weak and too isolated to fight back. They thought they had cornered a helpless, grieving widow in her own home. They thought their aggressive gaslighting and legal threats would paralyze me with fear. I let my breathing grow ragged, forcing my shoulders to shake uncontrollably. "I cannot go to a mental hospital," I sobbed, sinking down onto the bottom step of my staircase, burying my face in my good hand. "Please, Mom, do not lock me away. I will do whatever you want. I just want to stay in my house. Please do not let them take me away in a straitjacket. I am begging you." Brenda walked over and looked down at me, a sickening smile of absolute victory spreading across her perfectly manicured face. "Then you will behave, Nia," she commanded, her tone shifting from aggressive to a terrifying, mocking sweetness. "You will sit quietly, and you will let us take the reins. Mr. Vance will handle the court filings. Your father and I will manage your daily affairs. And Dominique will help us inventory the valuables in this house to ensure nothing is misplaced during your recovery." Dominique perked up at the mention of the inventory. "Actually, I am going to start right now," she announced, slipping her phone into her designer pocket. "Marcus had a massive collection of vintage watches in his study, and those designer bags in your closet need to be properly appraised for the estate records. I will just go upstairs and start packing them into protective cases so they do not get damaged while you are resting." "Wait, no," I pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand as Dominique gleefully strutted past me and headed up the carpeted stairs. "You cannot just take our personal belongings. Those are my memories of Marcus. Please, Dominique, leave his things alone. Let her do her job," Nia Calvin barked, stepping into my line of sight and blocking the staircase. "Worldly possessions are nothing but a distraction from spiritual healing. Your sister is doing you a massive favor by removing these heavy burdens from your fragile mind. You should be thanking her on your knees for stepping up during your hour of absolute weakness." I kept my face buried in my hand, hiding the cold, lethal smile that was currently stretching across my own lips. They had escalated the war, crossing a legal and moral line that guaranteed their absolute destruction. They wanted to play a game of legal hostage. They wanted to ransack my home like common thieves while legally binding my hands. I was more than ready to show them what happens when you try to trap a billionaire in her own castle. I kept my face buried in my hands, maintaining the absolute illusion of a broken, sobbing widow who had completely surrendered to her horrific fate. Calvin stood tall and imposing above me, his broad shoulders blocking the entire width of the wooden staircase. He acted as the holy sentinel of my sudden imprisonment, crossing his arms and staring down at me with a sickening look of righteous judgment. The heavy, sharp thud of Dominique's designer heels echoed loudly above us as she eagerly marched into my master bedroom suite. I could hear the distinct sound of my massive walk-in closet doors sliding open, followed immediately by the frantic rustling of wooden hangers and the aggressive pulling of vanity drawers. She was tearing through my personal sanctuary with zero hesitation, treating my private home like a luxury shopping mall where everything was marked with 100% discount. Brenda paced the length of my spacious living room, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the imported hardwood floors. She stopped directly in front of the marble fireplace, crossing her arms and looking down at me with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. "You should be endlessly grateful we are taking this massive burden off your hands, Nia." Brenda lectured, her voice dripping with toxic venom, masquerading as maternal care. "You have always been far too weak and fragile to handle actual adult responsibilities. Look at you right now, cowering on the stairs like a frightened child. You cannot even manage your own basic emotions, let alone navigate a highly complicated financial estate. You would lose every single penny Marcus left behind within a month because you are entirely incompetent." Calvin nodded vigorously, his leather-bound Bible tucked securely under his right arm. "Your mother speaks the righteous truth." He boomed, his pastoral voice filling the high-ceilinged room with suffocating hypocrisy. "You completely lack the spiritual and mental fortitude required to navigate the treacherous waters of wealth and liability. Marcus left you entirely exposed to greedy creditors and dangerous scavengers. We are simply stepping in to provide the firm guiding hand you have desperately needed since childhood. You should drop to your knees right now and thank the Lord for blessing you with a family willing to endure this massive public inconvenience just to save your soul from absolute ruin. Mr. Vance, the greasy, low-level attorney, stood near the entryway console casually inspecting a crystal vase, as if sizing up its immediate pawn value. The conservatorship will officially transfer all your banking privileges and property rights directly to your parents by tomorrow morning, Mrs. Sterling, he announced with a sleazy, triumphant grin stretching across his sweating face. They will receive a very generous monthly stipend from the estate for their ongoing administrative services, and you will be placed on a strictly monitored, highly restrictive financial allowance. If you require basic daily necessities like groceries, clothing, or medical supplies, you will submit a formal written request to your mother for approval. It is a foolproof legal mechanism carefully designed to protect incompetent, unstable individuals from their own reckless spending habits. From the second floor, a loud crash echoed down the stairwell, followed instantly by a high-pitched squeal of sheer materialistic delight. "Oh my God!" Dominique shrieked from the master suite, her voice vibrating with greed. "Nia, I had absolutely no idea Marcus bought you a limited edition Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag. This is absolutely gorgeous and virtually impossible to find. And he kept all these vintage Rolex watches just sitting in a velvet display case collecting dust. These are easily worth $100,000 on the resale market. I am definitely taking the Birkin bag to match my new outfit for the country club gala this weekend. You clearly will not be attending any social events for the next few years anyway, so you definitely do not need luxury accessories sitting around." The sheer audacity of her looting my dead husband's watches made my blood boil with a violent intensity, but I forced my muscles to remain completely limp and unthreatening. I let out a loud, pathetic wail, dragging my bruised body off the bottom step and intentionally collapsing onto the plush living room rug. I crawled slowly and awkwardly toward the center of the room, playing the part of a devastated woman entirely consumed by a psychological breakdown. My mother watched me drag myself across the expensive floor, her upper lip curling in absolute, unfiltered revulsion. "Get up off the floor right this instant," Nia Brenda commanded, stepping back quickly as if my grief might physically contaminate her tailored designer suit. "You are acting like an absolute animal. This is exactly why Dr. Thorne signed the medical affidavit without a single moment of hesitation. You are completely unhinged and emotionally unstable. If any of our wealthy friends in Atlanta high society saw you acting this pathetic way, our entire family would be a laughingstock. You are a profound embarrassment to the Sterling name. We are locking you away in a private psychiatric facility until you learn how to behave like a respectable human being. You will stay there until you are cured of this ridiculous dramatic behavior." I continued my slow, agonizing crawl, inching closer and closer to the massive glass and solid brass coffee table, positioned perfectly in the center of the living room. The physical pain in my fractured ribs flared sharply with every single movement, sending hot spikes of agony through my chest, but I completely ignored the pain. My focus was entirely locked on the underside of that heavy brass table frame. During the initial construction of this modern house, my elite corporate security team had absolutely insisted on installing covert emergency protocols throughout the entire property. Because I secretly controlled a $200 million venture capital empire, my personal safety was considered a matter of high-level corporate security. Dominique suddenly appeared at the top of the staircase, her arms completely overflowing, with my most expensive designer handbags and silk scarves. She had slung Marcus's heavy velvet watch case over her shoulder, completely disregarding the deep sentimental value of the precious items she was shamelessly stealing. She strutted down the wooden stairs, carefully stepping over my trembling body, as if I were a piece of discarded garbage blocking her path. "I am going to load these valuables into the trunk of my car. Right now," she announced happily, completely ignoring my fabricated sobbing. "I will come back up for the diamond jewelry box in a few minutes. Make sure she does not try to run out the back door, Dad. She might try to escape before the medical transport arrives." She is not going anywhere, Calvin replied coldly, stepping fully into the living room and physically blocking the pathway to the kitchen and the rear exit. The Holy Spirit has bound her to this floor to reflect deeply on her many sins and failures. She stays exactly where she is until the medical transport arrives with the restraints. She brings this harsh discipline upon herself through her constant disobedience. I finally reached the edge of the coffee table, letting my heavy bandaged head drop onto the soft rug, as if I had given up completely. I slid my uninjured right hand slowly beneath the thick brass frame, my fingers tracing the cool metal surface, until they brushed against a tiny, hidden indentation. Inside that small indentation was a highly advanced biometric panic button wired directly to an encrypted satellite network that could never be jammed or disconnected. It did not trigger loud audible alarms or flashing security lights. It simply sent a silent Priority 1 distress signal to the armed tactical security detail stationed exactly 1 block away in an unmarked surveillance vehicle. Simultaneously, the system broadcasted a critical emergency legal alert directly to Jonathan Hayes and his ruthless team of corporate litigators. I pressed my thumb firmly against the biometric sensor. A microscopic vibration pulsed against my skin, confirming the secure signal had been successfully transmitted and received. The silent countdown had officially begun. The absolute cavalry was coming, and they were bringing absolute unstoppable hellfire with them to my living room. I rolled slowly onto my side, keeping my right hand hidden beneath my body, and looked up at the 4 people currently holding me hostage in my own home. They were incredibly smug, completely convinced they had orchestrated the absolute perfect crime against a helpless victim. Mr. Vance was organizing his fraudulent court documents on my dining table, whistling a cheerful off-key tune as he calculated his upcoming payday. Calvin was loudly quoting scriptures about the virtues of obedience and parental authority. Dominique was making a hurried second trip up the stairs to aggressively plunder my remaining jewelry boxes, and Brenda was standing proudly over me adjusting her pearl necklace with an air of absolute unchallenged superiority. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Nia," Brenda sneered, looking down at me with cold, dead eyes that held no maternal warmth. "You always thought you were so incredibly smart, so fiercely independent. You moved away from the family, married a man who kept financial secrets, and thought you could survive in this harsh world without my daily guidance. Now look at you. You are a broken, helpless widow about to be locked securely in a padded room. You own absolutely nothing. We own you. Your father and I hold your entire life, your freedom, and your future in the palm of our hands. You will spend the rest of your miserable days sitting in a facility, and we will finally put Marcus's wasted money to good use, uplifting this family." I stared directly at my mother, letting her toxic, venomous words wash over me without absorbing a single ounce of their intended poison. She was incredibly confident, completely drunk on her own fabricated power and desperate greed. She truly thought she was staring at a defeated, shattered victim who had no remaining options. She had absolutely no idea she was actually looking at a billionaire chief executive officer who had just signed her permanent death warrant. The quiet, tree-lined suburban street outside my large front window remained deceptively peaceful, but I knew exactly what was rapidly approaching. My security contractors were highly trained former military professionals, heavily armed and fully authorized to use extreme physical measures to protect their principal client from an active hostage situation. Jonathan Hayes was a relentless legal shark who routinely destroyed multi-million-dollar international corporations for sport. He was currently mobilizing a fleet of black SUVs, bringing the full, terrifying weight of Sterling Holdings down upon this very house. I closed my eyes, letting out a soft, ragged sigh that sounded exactly like complete emotional surrender, but was actually profound, calculating anticipation. The agonizing hostage situation was about to end. The brutal, merciless slaughter was about to begin. The heavy silence in my living room was shattered by the sound of Brenda adjusting her pearl necklace, completely oblivious to the digital countdown ticking away in the background. "You will thank us for this eventually, Nia," she stated with absolute terrifying conviction. Someday, when your mind is healed, you will realize that a conservatorship was the only way to save you from your own staggering incompetence. I kept my head resting on the thick rug, counting the seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The heavy oak front door did not just open. It was thrown inward with a violent concussive force that rattled the expensive artwork hanging in the foyer. The sound of splintering wood and shattering door frames echoed through the house, causing Calvin to drop his leather-bound Bible in sheer panic. Mr. Vance shrieked, dropping his stack of fraudulent medical documents, the papers scattering across the imported hardwood floors like autumn leaves. 4 men in immaculate, tailored black suits flooded into my living room. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized precision of elite military operatives, their eyes scanning the perimeter, their hands resting cautiously near their waistbands. There was no hesitation. There was no polite inquiry. They instantly formed a tactical perimeter around my body, cutting off Brenda Calvin and the shady lawyer from taking a single step toward me. "Stay exactly where you are," the lead operative commanded. His voice was cold, flat, and absolute. "Do not make a single sudden movement. Keep your hands visible." "What is the meaning of this outrage?" Calvin bellowed, trying to puff out his chest and project his pastoral authority. "You are trespassing in a private residence. I am a deacon at Greater Grace Fellowship, and we are executing a lawful medical intervention for my severely disturbed daughter. I will have you all arrested." The operative did not even blink. "Step back, sir, or I will forcibly remove you from this property." From the second floor, a high-pitched scream ripped through the air. Dominique came stumbling down the wooden staircase, her designer heels slipping on the carpet. Behind her, a fifth security operative walked calmly, carrying the velvet watch case and the Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag she had just attempted to steal. He bypassed my sister completely, walking down the stairs and setting the stolen property safely onto the kitchen counter. "You cannot do this," Dominique cried, her face flushed with indignation and fear. "Those belong to the estate. We are the legal guardians." The heavy footsteps of a sixth man echoed in the entryway. Jonathan Hayes stepped over the ruined threshold of my front door, bringing the full crushing weight of his elite corporate law firm into my living room. Jonathan was a legend in Atlanta high society, a ruthless legal shark who wore $5,000 bespoke suits and destroyed multinational corporations before his morning coffee. He surveyed the chaotic scene with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. "You are not the legal guardian of anyone, young lady," Jonathan stated, his voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "And if you ever attempt to remove property from this residence again, I will personally ensure you face federal grand larceny charges." Brenda stared at Jonathan, recognizing his face from the cover of local business magazines. Her arrogant posture faltered slightly, but her toxic entitlement quickly overrode her common sense. "Mr. Hayes," she said, attempting to sound dignified despite the armed guards surrounding her, "you are completely misinformed. My daughter is suffering from severe psychosis. We have sworn medical affidavits from Dr. Eris Thorne. We are implementing an emergency conservatorship to protect her assets. You need to tell these thugs to leave immediately." Jonathan let out a harsh, mocking laugh. He walked slowly toward the center of the living room, stopping right next to the coffee table where I still lay. He looked down at the scattered papers Mr. Vance had dropped. "Dr. Eris Thorne lost his medical license in the state of Florida 3 years ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions," Jonathan announced, his eyes locking onto Mr. Vance. "He is currently under active investigation by the Georgia Medical Board for accepting cash bribes to sign falsified psychiatric evaluations. Using his signature to force a competent adult into a psychiatric hold is a felony conspiracy." Mr. Vance began to sweat profusely, his greasy complexion turning the color of dirty ash. He took a nervous step backward, bumping into the console table. "Now wait a minute, Mr. Hayes," the sleazy lawyer stammered, raising his hands in surrender. "I was just retained by this family to file standard probate paperwork. I had absolutely no idea the medical documents were compromised. I am just providing basic legal services. I have no part in any conspiracy. Jonathan stepped closer to Vance, his presence towering and lethal. My client is Naya Sterling. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Holdings. She controls a venture capital portfolio worth $200 million. You just broke into her private residence and attempted to legally kidnap her using forged medical records. I have a team of 12 senior litigators currently drafting a lawsuit that will personally bankrupt you, strip you of your bar license, and send you to state prison for the rest of your miserable life. The silence that followed was absolute. The revelation of my actual identity hit the room with the force of a detonating bomb. Brenda's jaw went slack. Calvin stared at Jonathan as if the lawyer had just spoken in a foreign language. Dominique looked wildly between me and the velvet watch case on the counter, her mind completely failing to process the words, $200 million. I placed my uninjured hand on the edge of the brass coffee table and slowly pushed myself up. The pathetic weeping widow vanished completely. I stood tall, smoothing down my oversized cardigan, my eyes locking directly onto my mother. The terrified victim was gone, replaced by the billionaire executive they had completely underestimated. "You can pack up your garbage and get out of my house, Mr. Vance," I commanded, my voice echoing with icy authority. "If I ever see your face again, I will make sure Jonathan buries you so deeply in legal debt you will never see daylight." Vance did not hesitate for a single second. He dropped to his knees, frantically scrambling to gather his scattered fraudulent papers from the rug. He shoved them carelessly into his scuffed leather briefcase, not even bothering to close the clasps. "I am leaving," he babbled, his voice high and panicked. "I rescind all representation of this family. I am completely, entirely off this case. Do not sue me, please." He bolted for the broken front door, practically sprinting past the security operatives and disappearing down the driveway without looking back once. The family's cheap hired gun had folded in less than 3 minutes. Calvin pointed a trembling finger at me, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "This is a trick. This is a demonic deception. You are an administrative assistant. You do not own a venture capital firm. You are lying to intimidate your own parents. You are sick in the head, Naya. Escort them out," I told the lead security operative, completely ignoring my father's pathetic outburst. "If they resist, use necessary physical force." The operatives moved instantly. 2 massive men in suits grabbed Calvin by the arms effortlessly, ignoring his loud religious protests as they hauled him toward the door. Another operative placed a firm hand on Dominique's shoulder, steering her aggressively away from the kitchen counter and toward the exit. She shrieked, struggling against his grip, complaining loudly about her designer shoes being scuffed, but the guard marched her forward without a single ounce of hesitation. Brenda stood her ground, her face contorted in a mask of absolute unhinged fury. She pointed her finger directly at my face, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical scream. "You are making a massive mistake, Nia. You are completely delusional if you think you can survive in this world without my protection. You are pushing away the only people who actually care about you. Marcus is dead. You have absolutely nothing. When the grief finally destroys your fragile mind, do not come crawling back to my house begging for money. You are going to end up completely penniless and entirely alone. You are a failure." I stared back at her, feeling absolutely nothing but profound, chilling satisfaction. "I am exactly where I want to be, Brenda. Now get out of my house before I have you arrested for trespassing." An operative firmly grasped her elbow, pulling her away from me. She thrashed against his hold, screaming obscenities that completely shattered her polished high society facade. The operatives dragged her through the foyer and shoved her out the front door, forcing her down the concrete steps. Calvin and Dominique were already standing on the manicured lawn, looking completely humiliated as several wealthy neighbors peeked out from their expensive suburban homes to witness the dramatic eviction. The lead operative pulled the broken front door shut as best as he could, securing the perimeter and leaving me alone in the quiet safety of my living room with Jonathan. The toxic infection had finally been purged from my home. Outside on the street, the scene was entirely different. Brenda, Calvin, and Dominique stood furiously on the sidewalk, their expensive clothes rumpled from the physical removal. Brenda paced back and forth across the pavement, her face red with sheer indignation and wounded pride. She smoothed down her tailored suit, trying desperately to regain her shattered dignity in front of the watching neighbors. "She has completely lost her mind," Brenda hissed, glaring at my broken front door. "Did you hear the ridiculous lies she was telling a billionaire chief executive? $200 million. She has gone totally psychotic from the trauma of the crash. That lawyer is probably just an expensive actor she hired to intimidate us." Calvin straightened his tie, clutching his Bible tightly against his chest. "The Lord will punish her severe disrespect," he declared, his voice shaking with arrogant fury. "She has forsaken her family and spit on our divine guidance. Let her rot in that empty house. She will soon see the terrible error of her ways." Dominique crossed her arms, a vicious, triumphant smirk, slowly replacing her earlier panic. "Why are we even upset?" she asked, looking between her furious parents. "Let her play pretend with her fake security guards and her imaginary venture capital firm. We do not need her compliance anymore. We already won the war." Brenda stopped pacing, a matching look of greedy realization spreading across her face. Dominique was absolutely right. The dramatic confrontation in the living room had been humiliating, but it did not change their ultimate financial victory. "Trey has the paperwork," Dominique reminded them, pulling out her phone to check her reflection in the dark screen. "Nia signed the estate control agreement yesterday morning. Trey is probably sitting in the bank manager's office right this second, transferring Marcus's $2 million life insurance policy into his dealership account. We have total control of the real money." Calvin nodded, his righteous anger melting into smug satisfaction. "The wicked shall perish, but the righteous shall inherit the wealth," he misquoted, justifying their theft with his usual religious hypocrisy. "Trey has the legal authority to drain every single account Marcus left behind. Once those funds are fully secured, we will let the bank foreclose on this house. Naya will be out on the street with absolutely nothing, just like your mother predicted." They clustered together on the sidewalk, completely insulated by their boundless arrogance and bottomless greed. They truly believed they had outsmarted me. They thought my display of power with Jonathan Hayes was nothing more than a desperate theatrical bluff from a grieving widow losing her grip on reality. They were comforting themselves with the absolute certainty that Trey was currently securing their luxurious future. They had absolutely no idea that Trey was simultaneously walking directly into a financial slaughterhouse that would obliterate their entire family legacy. 10 miles away from my shattered front door, Trey Washington was confidently striding through the gleaming glass doors of the premier SunTrust Bank branch in downtown Atlanta. He was wearing his best custom-tailored Italian suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that screamed unearned prosperity. His posture was perfectly straight, radiating the absolute arrogance of a man who believed he had just pulled off the heist of the century without leaving a single fingerprint. He adjusted his expensive cufflinks as he walked past the teller lines, bypassing the ordinary customers waiting to cash their meager paychecks. Trey considered himself a member of the elite, a shark swimming among minnows, and today was the day he finally claimed his rightful fortune. He approached the heavy mahogany desk of the senior branch manager, a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation to me, just a common Atlanta coincidence. Trey slapped the thick stack of legal documents onto the polished wood surface with a loud, triumphant thud. The estate control agreement bearing my forged, trembling signature sat proudly on top. "Good morning," Trey announced, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced charisma. "I am here to execute the estate transfers for Marcus Vance. I am the designated legal administrator. I need to consolidate his checking, savings, and investment accounts. And I need to initiate the immediate wire transfer for his $2 million life insurance policy into my commercial business account." The branch manager, a meticulous man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, picked up the documents. He examined the signatures, the notary stamps, and the attached death certificate. Everything appeared perfectly in order to the untrained eye. "I am very sorry for your family's loss, Mr. Washington," the manager said politely, typing Marcus's social security number into his encrypted terminal. "Please give me a moment to pull up the full financial profile for Mr. Vance." "Take your time," Trey replied, leaning back in the plush leather guest chair and crossing his legs. He pulled out his smartphone, quickly checking his text messages. He had missed calls from his loan sharks, aggressive threats warning him that his time was running out. Trey simply smiled at the screen. He was minutes away from transferring millions of dollars. He would pay off his dangerous gambling debts, save his failing luxury car dealership, and still have enough leftover cash to live like a king. The hit on Marcus had been messy, but the payoff was going to be absolutely spectacular. The continuous clicking of the manager's keyboard suddenly stopped. A heavy, uncomfortable silence filled the spacious office. The manager adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to his monitor, as if he could not quite believe what he was reading. He clicked the mouse a few more times, navigating through different banking screens, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Mr. Washington?" The manager began, his professional tone wavering slightly. "You mentioned consolidating Mr. Vance's assets and processing a $2 million life insurance payout." "Yes," Trey said impatiently, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk. "I need the liquid cash wired to my dealership account by the end of business today. The routing numbers are listed on page 4 of that packet." The manager slowly turned his computer monitor around so it faced Trey directly. "I apologize, Mr. Washington, but there seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding the financial status of this estate. I am looking at the complete portfolio for Marcus Vance. There are no investment portfolios. There are no hidden trust funds. The only active account registered under this Social Security number is a standard personal checking account." Trey scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "That is impossible." Marcus was a top-tier biotech developer. He made millions. Check the life insurance policy. His employer provided a massive premium. "I have checked the National Insurance Registry," the manager replied, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. Marcus Vance did not possess a $2 million life insurance policy. His former employer provided a basic accidental death benefit that barely covers standard funeral expenses. Furthermore, that specific policy was legally transferred to a corporate holding company 3 years ago. It does not belong to the estate. It is completely inaccessible to you. Trey felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. The confident, arrogant smirk melted off his face, replaced by a sudden choking wave of panic. He stared at the glowing computer screen, his eyes desperately scanning the numbers displayed on the banking dashboard. "Then what is the current balance of the estate?" Trey demanded, his voice cracking with rising terror. "How much cash is actually in his checking account right now?" The manager pointed a stiff finger at the highlighted row on the screen. "The total liquid balance of the Marcus Vance estate is exactly $5,000. $5,000. The words echoed in Trey's mind like a death knell. It was a statistical impossibility. It was a mathematical joke. He had orchestrated a brutal, violent murder. He had hired a truck driver to crush a man to death on his wedding night. He had manipulated a grieving widow, threatened her in a church hallway, and forced her to sign a comprehensive legal contract. He had risked federal prison and lethal retaliation from his bookies, all for a massive payday that simply did not exist. "Check it again," Trey shouted, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk, causing the manager to jump back in alarm. "You are making a mistake. He has to have more money. Where is his corporate salary? Where are his company shares?" The manager quickly turned the monitor away, adopting a defensive, rigid posture. "I assure you my system is completely accurate." Mr. Vance's corporate salary was routed to a blind trust controlled by an external venture capital firm. He owned absolutely zero equity in his biotech research. You are the legal administrator of a severely depleted estate. You have full control over exactly $5,000. Trey wiped a cold, clammy hand across his forehead, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He had spent months meticulously planning Marcus's death, carefully manipulating the truck driver, and organizing the perfect alibi. He had endured Calvin's sanctimonious church services and Brenda's insufferable arrogance, all to secure this specific payout. The insurance money was supposed to be his golden ticket out of the dangerous, suffocating underworld he had secretly entrenched himself in. He had promised his loan sharks a massive lump sum payment by Friday afternoon. The realization that he had absolutely nothing to offer them made his stomach churn violently. He was not just broke. He was a dead man walking. The dealership would be gone, his reputation destroyed, and the men he owed money to would not hesitate to collect their debts in blood. He grabbed the fraudulent estate control agreement off the mahogany desk, his hands shaking so violently he nearly tore the thick paper in half. He needed to leave the bank immediately. He needed to find Dominique and formulate a desperate alternative escape plan before the financial wolves descended upon their house. Trey could not breathe. The walls of the bank felt like they were rapidly closing in, crushing the oxygen from his lungs. He had gambled his entire life on this payout. Without the $2 million, his luxury car dealership would be seized by the bank by Friday. He had signed the estate control agreement thinking he was securing a fortune. He had absolutely no idea that by signing that specific document, he had legally assumed personal responsibility for a $10 million corporate debt owed directly to Sterling Holdings. The financial guillotine was already wrapped tightly around his throat, and he had just realized the vault he broke into was completely empty. At that exact same moment, 10 miles north in the affluent district of Buckhead, Dominique was aggressively maintaining her luxurious facade. She was strutting through the polished marble corridors of Phipps Plaza, Atlanta's most exclusive high-end shopping destination. She was flanked by three of her most prominent high society friends, women who judged each other solely on the brand of their handbags and the limit of their credit cards. Dominique felt invincible. She had just left my house thoroughly convinced that her husband was currently securing a multi-million-dollar fortune. She believed her financial troubles were permanently over. Dominique marched confidently into a premium designer boutique, her eyes scanning the shelves for the newest, most expensive seasonal collections. She wanted to celebrate her impending wealth. She wanted to prove to her judgmental friends that the Vance Washington family was thriving despite the tragic wedding night accident. She spent 45 minutes tossing silk blouses, cashmere coats, and limited edition leather boots onto the pristine glass checkout counter. The sales associate, a young woman in a sharp black uniform, cheerfully tallied up the massive haul. "Your total comes to $12,450, ma'am," the associate announced with a polite retail smile. Dominique did not even blink. She reached into her quilted Chanel purse and pulled out her gleaming platinum credit card with an arrogant theatrical flourish. She handed it to the associate, turning to her friends with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Trey is closing a massive real estate deal today," she lied smoothly. "We are completely remodeling the master suite, so I absolutely needed a fresh autumn wardrobe to match the new aesthetic." Her friends cooed in jealous admiration, completely buying the fabricated narrative. Dominique soaked up their validation, her ego inflating to a dangerous, unsustainable size. She was the golden child. She was the wealthy socialite. She was winning the game of life. The sales associate swiped the platinum card through the polished payment terminal. The machine beeped a harsh, unyielding negative tone. The associate frowned, looking down at the screen. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Washington. It seems this card has been declined." Dominique's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, letting out an annoyed, dismissive sigh. "Oh, the fraud department is so incredibly overprotective. I was just traveling last week, and they always flag large purchases. Just run my gold card instead. It has a much higher limit anyway." She retrieved a second premium credit card from her wallet and slapped it onto the glass counter. Her friends exchanged a brief, subtle glance of silent judgment, the first microscopic crack in Dominique's perfect social armor. The associate swiped the gold card. The machine emitted the exact same harsh, rejecting tone. The associate's retail smile vanished, replaced by an expression of extreme, uncomfortable pity. Ma'am, this card is also declining. In fact, there is a specific error code on my screen. It says this account has been frozen by the issuer due to severe delinquency. The boutique fell completely silent. The background ambient music seemed to fade away. Dominique's friends took a collective step backward, physically distancing themselves from the toxic stench of financial ruin. In their social circle, a declined card was a minor embarrassment. Two declined cards, accompanied by a public declaration of severe delinquency, was an absolute irredeemable death sentence. That is completely impossible. Dominique shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the quiet boutique. Her perfectly contoured face turned a deep, blotchy shade of red. Run it again. The machine is obviously broken. Do you know who I am? My husband owns a luxury car dealership. We have millions of dollars in liquid assets. You are publicly humiliating me over a computer glitch. The associate pushed the cards back across the glass counter, her tone shifting from polite to firm. I cannot run them again, ma'am. The terminal will not allow it. I am going to have to ask you to provide an alternative form of payment, or I will have to return these items to the sales floor. Dominique snatched the plastic cards from the counter, her hands trembling violently. She felt the burning, judgmental stares of her high society friends piercing through her back. The luxurious facade she had spent years carefully constructing was crumbling into dust right in front of her eyes. She pulled out her smartphone with shaking fingers, intending to call Trey and demand he transfer funds immediately. Before she could dial his number, the screen lit up with a barrage of urgent automated text messages. They were not from Trey, they were from her banking institutions. Alert. Your Platinum account has been suspended due to non-payment. Alert. Your Gold account has been frozen. Alert. Your primary checking account is currently overdrawn by $400. Alert. Your vehicle loan is 90 days past due. Repossession protocols have been initiated. Dominique stared at the cascading notifications, her breath catching painfully in her throat. The messages kept coming, a relentless digital firing squad obliterating her entire financial existence. Her accounts were not just low, they were entirely frozen. The massive mountain of secret debt she had accumulated to fund her fake glamorous lifestyle had finally collapsed, burying her alive. Dominique dropped her designer shopping baskets onto the polished tile floor, abandoning the thousands of dollars worth of luxury merchandise she could no longer afford. The sales associate watched her with a mixture of professional detachment and quiet satisfaction, clearly accustomed to seeing arrogant socialites face sudden financial reality. Dominique stumbled out of the boutique, her high heels clicking erratically as she blindly navigated the crowded, brightly lit corridors of Phipps Plaza. Her mind raced with terrifying, unanswerable questions. How did the banks freeze everything so quickly? Why were they initiating vehicle repossession protocols without a formal warning? She dialed Trey's number repeatedly, but the calls went straight to voicemail, heightening her absolute suffocating terror. She looked up at her friends, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. They were already turning their backs, whispering quietly to each other as they walked out of the boutique, instantly abandoning her the moment the money vanished. Dominique stood frozen in the middle of Phipps Plaza, clutching her useless plastic cards, completely unable to comprehend the absolute devastation of her reality. Across the city in a quiet, sterile bank office, Trey Washington was experiencing the exact same horrifying revelation. He stared blankly at the $5,000 balance on the computer screen, the crushing weight of a $10 million liability hovering invisibly above his head. The grand, murderous master plan had completely failed. The vault was empty, the credit lines were dead, and the ruthless, silent financial strike orchestrated by the widow they had completely underestimated was about to drown them all in an ocean of inescapable ruin. The tires of Trey's leased Mercedes screeched violently against the pristine asphalt of my driveway. He slammed the transmission into park, not even bothering to turn off the engine before throwing his door open. A second later, A sleek black SUV pulled up directly behind him. My parents and Dominique piled out. They had clearly regrouped after their humiliating physical eviction from my property earlier that morning. Now, however, the arrogant confidence that had previously shielded them was completely gone. In its place was a frantic, wild desperation. They marched up my front walkway like a pack of rabid wolves denied their anticipated meal. My private security detail, now standing openly on the front porch in tailored black suits, immediately moved to intercept them. The lead operative raised a massive hand, his posture rigid and uncompromising. I watched the entire chaotic scene unfold through the crystal-clear feed of my tablet, sitting calmly in my living room. I pressed the intercom button connected to the front porch speakers. "Let them inside," I instructed smoothly. "Escort them directly to the main living area, and then stand guard at the exits. Ensure they do not touch a single item in my home." The heavy oak door, temporarily reinforced by my team after the morning's breach, swung open. Trey stormed into the foyer first, his expensive silk tie hanging loosely around his neck, his face flushed a dangerous mottled crimson. Dominique followed close behind her, makeup smeared from frantic crying, aggressively clutching her useless frozen credit cards. Brenda and Calvin entered last, their faces masks of righteous indignation, masking deep, unsettling panic. They burst into my living room, completely prepared to scream, demand, and intimidate. Instead, they froze in their tracks. The pathetic, trembling widow, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, was entirely gone. I was sitting at the head of my custom brass coffee table, dressed in a sharply tailored emerald green blazer and immaculate black trousers. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, commanding style. My posture was perfectly straight, radiating the absolute chilling authority of a corporate titan preparing to execute a hostile takeover. The medical sling was gone. The feigned weakness had vanished into thin air. Beside me stood Jonathan Hayes, silent and lethal, holding a thick leather portfolio. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" "Nia Trey," roared, his voice cracking with unchecked hysteria. He completely ignored the heavily armed security guards standing by the doorways. He lunged toward the coffee table, slamming his hands down onto the glass. "I just came from the bank. The manager told me Marcus only had $5,000. Where is the rest of it? Where is the $2 million life insurance policy? Where are his corporate stock options? You hid the money. You transferred it illegally before I signed the estate control agreement." Dominique pushed her way forward, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. "My credit cards are declining everywhere," she shrieked, waving the useless plastic squares in the air. "The bank sent me an automated message saying my vehicle is up for immediate repossession. My platinum accounts are entirely frozen. What did you do to my accounts, Nia? Tell your fake security guards to give me back my money right now." Brenda stepped past her hysterical daughter, crossing her arms and lifting her chin in a desperate attempt to reclaim her shattered maternal authority. "You have completely lost your mind." "Nia?" Brenda spat, her eyes darting nervously between Jonathan Hayes and my perfectly calm expression. "You are having a severe psychotic break. You are sabotaging your sister's finances and hiding your dead husband's assets to punish us for trying to help you. Your father and I are calling the police. We will have you arrested for financial fraud, and then we will have you permanently committed to a psychiatric facility." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply leaned forward, resting my elbows on the brass table, and looked directly into my mother's cold, arrogant eyes. "Sit down," I commanded. The sheer freezing weight of my tone hit the room like a physical shockwave. It was a voice they had never heard from me before. It was not the voice of the family scapegoat. It was the voice of the billionaire chief executive officer who was accustomed to immediate, unquestioning obedience. "Sit down right now, or my security team will physically force you into those chairs," I repeated, locking eyes with Trey. "And if any of you raise your voices in my house again, you will be violently thrown out onto the street, and I will ensure you spend the night in a county jail cell." The absolute certainty in my voice paralyzed them. Calvin swallowed hard, his grip on his Bible slipping slightly. He slowly lowered himself onto the edge of the velvet sofa. Brenda, sensing the undeniable shift in power, reluctantly sat down next to him, her posture rigid with defiant terror. Trey and Dominique sank into the matching armchairs, their earlier aggression completely deflated by my terrifying composure. "You all came here expecting to feast on the corpse of my husband," I began, my words slicing through the tense silence of the living room. "You thought Marcus was a wealthy biotech genius who hid millions of dollars in secret accounts. You thought you could simply force a grieving widow to sign a piece of paper and walk away with a massive fortune to cover your pathetic, embarrassing debts." I gestured to Jonathan, who stepped forward and placed a sleek black folder onto the center of the glass table. He opened it, revealing a stack of highly classified, watermarked corporate documents. "Let me introduce you to reality," I said, tapping the top document with my index finger. Marcus Vance was an incredibly brilliant researcher, a visionary scientist, and a wonderful husband, but he was never the primary breadwinner in our household. He never owned a single share of equity in his biotech laboratory. He never possessed a $2 million life insurance policy. His entire research facility, his equipment, and his corporate salary were fully funded by an anonymous venture capital firm. Trey stared at the documents, his eyes darting frantically across the complex financial terminology. If Marcus did not have the money, he stammered, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then who funded the lab? Who holds the equity? I picked up the next document in the folder and slid it directly across the table until it rested right in front of Trey. It was an official state incorporation certificate bearing the massive embossed seal of the Georgia Secretary of State. "Read the name of the chief executive officer, Trey," I ordered coldly. "Read it out loud for the rest of the family." Trey picked up the heavy parchment paper. His hands were shaking so violently, the paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. He stared at the bold black ink at the bottom of the page. His face drained of all remaining color, turning the sickly, pale hue of a corpse. "Nia Sterling," Trey whispered, his voice completely devoid of breath. "Chief Executive Officer and sole majority shareholder of Sterling Holdings." Dominique snatched the paper from her husband's trembling hands, her eyes scanning the financial disclosures attached to the incorporation certificate. $200 million, she gasped, her voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "You own a venture capital firm worth $200 million. That is impossible. You are just a low-level administrative assistant. Mom said you barely made enough money to pay your rent." Mom has been confidently broadcasting her own delusional assumptions for my entire adult life, I replied, shifting my gaze to Brenda. "I let you all believe I was a struggling, quiet assistant because it kept your toxic, endless greed entirely focused away from me. I built a massive financial empire in total secrecy. I funded my husband's dreams. I bought this entire estate in cash. I am the billionaire you have been desperately trying to steal from." The absolute reality of the situation crashed down upon them like a collapsing building. Brenda's mouth hung open, her eyes wide with a horrifying mixture of shock, awe, and immediate calculating greed. Calvin dropped his Bible onto the rug, his holy facade completely obliterated by the sheer magnitude of my wealth. They were staring at the family scapegoat, suddenly realizing she possessed more power and money than they could ever comprehend. But the realization of my wealth was only the first part of my strike. I signaled Jonathan again. He produced 3 separate thick legal files, placing them methodically onto the glass table. "You thought you outsmarted me yesterday, Trey," I continued, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal cadence. "You thought you aggressively intimidated a weak widow into signing over a fortune? You bragged to your loan sharks that you were going to pay off your underground gambling debts by Friday. But you did not bother to read the fine print in Section 4, subsection C of that estate control agreement." Trey looked up at me, pure, unadulterated terror radiating from his eyes. "What did I sign, Nia? What did you make me do?" "You signed a legally binding, irrevocable assumption of debt," I explained, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. Marcus's defunct shell company, Zenith Biolabs, held a $10 million commercial liability loan. That loan was directly issued by Sterling Holdings. By signing that estate agreement to claim a life insurance policy that never existed, you officially personally guaranteed a $10 million debt to my corporation. I now own you, Trey. I own your failing luxury car dealership. I own your inventory. And since you breached the repayment terms this morning, my acquisition team has already initiated aggressive asset seizure protocols. Trey let out a guttural, suffocating sound, burying his face in his hands. Dominique stared at him in absolute horror, finally understanding why her platinum credit cards had been humiliatingly declined at the boutique. She was married to a man who was tens of millions of dollars in debt to her own sister. But I did not stop there. I turned my attention to my parents, who were sitting frozen on the sofa watching their golden child's husband completely disintegrate. "Do not think you two are walking away from this unscathed," I said, sliding the second legal file toward Calvin and Brenda. "You stood by and eagerly supported the man who hired a truck driver to crush my husband to death. You broke into my house with a fraudulent lawyer and tried to legally kidnap me. You wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal my money." Brenda shook her head frantically, reaching out a trembling hand toward the paperwork. "Nia, please," she begged, her arrogant tone completely replaced by pathetic desperation. "We are your parents. We gave you life. We had no idea Trey was involved in the crash. We just wanted to make sure the family was financially secure. You have so much money. You can help us now. We can be a real family." I picked up the heavy file and opened it, revealing a stack of mortgage deeds and bank transfer records. "Your financial security is permanently gone, Brenda," I stated mercilessly. "You have been secretly remortgaging your massive estate in Alpharetta for 5 years to fund Dominique's fake socialite lifestyle. You took out predatory loans against Calvin's church properties. Your debt was staggering, and your creditors were preparing to foreclose on your precious mansion next week." Calvin gasped, clutching his chest. "How do you know about the church loans?" "No one knows about those. I know because Sterling Holdings bought them all at dawn this morning," I revealed, delivering the ultimate crushing blow. "I used my subsidiary shell companies to purchase every single outstanding mortgage, personal loan, and line of credit you possess. I own the deed to your house in Alpharetta. I own the debt on your church. I hold the absolute power to evict you from your high society kingdom, and I am calling all your debts due immediately." The living room descended into a state of absolute paralyzing horror. The silence was so profound I could hear the desperate, shallow breathing of the 4 people sitting across from me. They had stormed into my house expecting to demand answers and reclaim their dominance. Instead, they had walked directly into a perfectly executed financial ambush. I had stripped away their fake wealth, their unearned status, and their toxic pride. They were sitting in the luxurious home of a billionaire, realizing they were completely, utterly destitute, and their executioner was the daughter they had abused and underestimated their entire lives. The suffocating silence hanging over my living room finally shattered. It did not break with a whimper, but with a blood-curdling scream that tore through the air. Dominique, the flawless socialite of Atlanta, completely snapped. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She turned toward Trey, her eyes wide with a maniacal frenzy. The flawless veneer she had cultivated simply evaporated, leaving behind a desperate creature fighting for survival. "You bankrupt, lying, pathetic loser!" Dominique shrieked, lunging across the space between their armchairs. She threw herself onto her husband, her manicured hands transforming into claws. She slapped him across the face with a sickening smack. "You told me we were rich. You told me Marcus left us millions. You dragged me into $10 million of debt." Trey raised his arms desperately, trying to shield his face from her relentless assault. But Dominique was consumed by the realization of her ruin. She pounded her fists against his chest, screaming obscenities that demolished her refined persona. "My credit cards are frozen because of you. My car is being repossessed because of you. I am going to be a laughingstock at the country club. You ruined my entire life. Trey shoved her backward, his own panic morphing into violent frustration. "Get off me, you crazy idiot!" he roared, stumbling backward until he hit the velvet sofa. "I did this for us. I did this to pay off the debts you racked up buying designer garbage to impress your fake friends. You think I wanted to owe $10 million to a venture capital firm? I thought I was securing a life insurance payout. A payout that never existed," Dominique wailed, throwing a decorative silk pillow directly at his head. "You signed a contract without reading it. You let my sister outsmart you. You are completely useless." They continued screaming at each other, their marriage dissolving into toxic ashes right in front of my coffee table. My security operatives shifted their weight, stepping forward to intervene, but I raised a single hand to stop them. I wanted to watch the golden couple of my family tear each other to shreds. I wanted them to experience the absolute destruction of the lies they had built their entire relationship upon. They had bonded over their shared greed and willingness to step on anyone to get ahead. Now that exact same greed was actively consuming them alive, burning their partnership to the ground in spectacular fashion. As Dominique collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, Calvin realized the sheer unavoidable permanence of their situation. My father, the proud deacon of Greater Grace Fellowship, the man who had always looked down on me with righteous disdain, slowly lowered himself until his knees hit the imported rug. He was physically bowing to the daughter he had spent 32 years tormenting. Nia, Calvin begged, his deep baritone voice trembling with a desperate quiver. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of frantic prayer, looking up at me with tears spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "Please, daughter. The Lord commands us to forgive those who trespass against us. We are flesh and blood. You cannot seize the church property. You cannot take the house. That church is my entire legacy. You are letting anger poison your soul." I looked down at the man who had weaponized religion to justify every cruel, selfish action he had ever taken. "Do not dare invoke God in my house, Calvin," I replied, my voice slicing through his hypocritical begging like a razor. "Where was your righteous mercy when you stood by and let Trey plan a hostile takeover of my estate? Where was your holy grace when you stormed into my home with a fraudulent lawyer intending to lock me inside a psychiatric ward? You wanted to declare me legally insane so you could drain my bank accounts." Calvin shook his head rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. "The devil clouded our judgment, Naya. We lost our way. But you have been blessed with unimaginable wealth. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You can afford to show us grace. Please, I am begging you as your father. Do not leave us destitute. Do not let the bank lock the doors of my sanctuary." "Your sanctuary was funded by fraudulent loans and secret mortgages," I stated coldly, not feeling a single ounce of pity for the weeping man at my feet. "You preached about honesty on Sunday mornings, and then you committed financial fraud on Monday afternoons to fund your lavish lifestyle. I am simply calling your debts due right now. If you want mercy, I suggest you look toward the heavens, because you will find absolutely none in this room." Seeing her husband weeping on the floor and her favorite daughter having a nervous breakdown, Brenda realized their aggressive tactics had completely failed. She shifted her strategy, falling back on the one manipulation tool she believed was entirely bulletproof. She stood up from the sofa, smoothing down her wrinkled designer suit, and took a slow, tentative step toward me. Her eyes were wide, brimming with manufactured maternal sorrow. "Nia, my sweet girl." Brenda cooed, her voice softening into a sickly, desperate cadence. She reached out her hand, gesturing toward me, as if I were a frightened child she was trying to coax out of a corner. "You have made your point. You have proven how incredibly smart and successful you are. I am so unbelievably proud of you. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave birth to you. I raised you. We are your family." Brenda continued, taking another cautious step forward, ignoring the warning glance from my security team. "You cannot throw your own mother out onto the street. You cannot take away the house where you grew up. I did my absolute best for you, Nia. I pushed you hard because I wanted you to succeed. You cannot destroy the woman who gave you life. I walked around the brass coffee table until I was standing inches away from the woman who had made my childhood an absolute living nightmare. You did not give me life, Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. You gave me a constant suffocating complex of inadequacy. You treated me like a broken defective accessory while you worshipped the ground Dominique walked on. You watched me grieve my dead husband in an intensive care unit, and your only concern was retrieving a bloody Rolex watch so you could pawn it. You did not push me to succeed. You pushed me aside, ignoring my existence unless you needed a punching bag. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her throat as my words struck her with absolute, undeniable truth. You are only playing the mother card now because your credit limit has been reduced to 0. I continued staring directly into her terrified eyes. You do not love me. You love my bank account. You love the $200 million sitting in my venture capital firm, but you will never touch a single penny of it. You are going to pack your bags, and you are going to vacate that heavily mortgaged mansion in Alpharetta by the end of the week. Brenda collapsed backward onto the sofa, her face buried in her trembling hands, finally defeated by the sheer magnitude of her permanent ruin. The matriarch of the family had been completely dismantled. I turned my attention away from my sobbing parents and my hysterical sister. I looked directly at Trey. He was leaning heavily against the wall, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, looking like a cornered animal waiting for the final lethal strike. He had tried to play chess with a master and lost everything. I nodded to Jonathan. The imposing lawyer reached into his leather portfolio and withdrew a crisp sheet of legal paper. He stepped forward and shoved the document directly against Trey's chest. Trey fumbled, catching the paper with shaking hands. "What is this?" Trey whispered, his eyes scanning the bold black text. "That is a formal 24-hour demand notice," I announced, my voice echoing with terrifying, absolute finality. "You signed a legally binding contract assuming a $10 million corporate liability. You have exactly 24 hours to wire $10 million in liquid funds directly to Sterling Holdings." Trey dropped the paper, his knees buckling slightly. "I do not have $10 million. I do not even have $10,000. You know I cannot pay this." "Then you had better start praying," I replied coldly, turning my back on him. "Because if those funds do not hit my account by this exact time tomorrow, I am handing this signed contract over to the federal authorities. You will be facing immediate federal fraud charges. You have 24 hours, Trey. The clock is ticking. Now get out of my house, and take your broken family with you." My security operatives moved with immediate lethal efficiency. They seized Trey by the collar of his ruined designer suit and bodily shoved him through the entryway. Calvin and Brenda were herded out right behind him, dragging a still sobbing Dominique down the front steps of my estate. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing with absolute finality. I stood in the center of my living room, smoothing the lapels of my emerald green blazer. The 24-hour clock was ticking, and I knew exactly what a desperate cornered animal would do next. Trey was drowning in a catastrophic ocean of underground gambling debt and corporate liability. He had no money, no leverage, and no legitimate legal standing. But he possessed a toxic, unyielding arrogance. That night, inside the dark, oppressive walls of my parents' heavily mortgaged mansion in Alpharetta, Trey and Calvin orchestrated a final pathetic Hail Mary maneuver. They scoured the bottom of the Atlanta legal barrel until they found a sleazy, desperate attorney willing to entertain their delusional narrative. They concocted a wildly fabricated story claiming I had forged the $10 million debt assumption. They planned to file an emergency ex parte injunction at the Fulton County Courthouse first thing the next morning, hoping a sympathetic civil judge would temporarily freeze my massive venture capital assets while the fraudulent claims were investigated. It was a stunningly stupid, highly illegal strategy built on perjury and sheer panic. They believed they could use the sluggish bureaucracy of the civil court system to buy themselves enough time to escape their financial ruin. They thought they were taking the offensive. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into the jaws of a federal and state-coordinated ambush. The morning sun baked the concrete steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Trey and Calvin marched up the wide exterior stairs with their newly hired attorney, a man sweating profusely in a cheap beige suit. Trey adjusted his silk tie, attempting to project the image of a wealthy, aggrieved estate manager rather than a bankrupt, cornered murderer. Calvin gripped his leather-bound Bible, his face set in a mask of rigid, hypocritical piety. They believed they were marching into a standard civil hearing room. They expected to face a bored probate judge and perhaps one of my junior corporate lawyers. They intended to play the role of the concerned, righteous family members protecting a mentally unstable widow from herself. They pushed through the heavy double doors of courtroom 4B. The smug, confident smirks on their faces vanished the very second they crossed the threshold. The courtroom was not filled with the typical drone of civil litigation. It was dead silent, carrying the heavy charged atmosphere of a high-level criminal tribunal. I was sitting at the respondent table radiating absolute terrifying power. I had discarded the emerald blazer from the previous day. Today, I was wearing a razor-sharp tailored crimson suit that fit like custom armor. The deep red fabric stood out violently against the dark mahogany of the courtroom furniture. My hair was pulled back into a severe, commanding style, and my posture was perfectly straight. I looked like an executioner waiting for the guillotine to drop. Jonathan Hayes stood right beside me, buttoning his $5,000 bespoke suit jacket. But Jonathan was not the only legal heavyweight in the room. Flanking my left side was a team of 4 elite corporate litigators from Sterling Holdings. And standing directly in front of the judge bench, organizing a massive stack of criminal files, was Marcus Vance's old college roommate, a man who now happened to be the district attorney for Fulton County. Trey froze in the center aisle, his expensive leather shoes completely glued to the carpet. His breathing hitched, his eyes darting frantically around the imposing room. He looked at my crimson suit, then at Jonathan, and finally at the district attorney. The cheap lawyer Trey had hired took one look at the legal firepower assembled at the front of the room, turned completely pale, and physically took a step away from his own clients. "What is going on here?" Calvin demanded, his booming pastoral voice cracking with sudden, undeniable terror. He gripped his Bible so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "We requested an emergency civil hearing for a protective injunction. Why is the district attorney present in a probate dispute?" The judge, a stern, unyielding woman with decades of experience on the bench, banged her wooden gavel sharply against the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Washington and Mr. Sterling," the judge announced coldly. "Your emergency civil injunction, alleging financial forgery, has been reviewed. It has also been immediately dismissed with extreme prejudice." Trey let out a strangled gasp, his hands shaking violently at his sides. "Dismissed. You cannot dismiss it. She forged that $10 million contract. She manipulated the estate. I am the legal administrator. I demand that you freeze her venture capital assets immediately." The district attorney turned around, fixing Trey with a stare so lethal it could cut through solid steel. "You are not demanding anything in this courtroom, Mr. Washington," the DA stated, his voice ringing with absolute crushing authority. "You filed a sworn civil affidavit this morning, claiming Mrs. Sterling forged a financial document. Filing a perjured document in a court of law is a felony, but frankly, perjury is the absolute least of your current problems." I stood up slowly from the defense table, smoothing the front of my crimson jacket. I looked directly into Trey's panicked, bloodshot eyes. "You thought you could use the legal system as a shield, Trey. You thought you could lie to a judge, freeze my bank accounts, and use the ensuing chaos to slip away from the dangerous loan sharks hunting you down. You completely underestimated exactly who you were fighting. I do not just play the game, I own the entire board." Trey stumbled backward, bumping heavily into the wooden gallery pews. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his chest heaving under his tailored shirt. He looked like a man watching the ocean recede just before a massive tsunami struck the shoreline. "What did you do, Nia?" he whispered, sheer panic radiating from his trembling lips. "I did exactly what I promised I would do. I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling cadence. I gave you 24 hours to pay a $10 million debt. You failed to pay. But I also told you that if you did not pay, I would hand the contract over to the federal authorities. What I did not mention was that I had already handed them something far more devastating than a commercial loan default. Jonathan Hayes stepped forward, placing a small encrypted digital tablet onto the polished wooden table. He tapped the screen once. The high-quality speakers in the courtroom suddenly crackled to life. The harsh, echoing sounds of a concrete interrogation room filled the air. Then the voice of the truck driver echoed clearly across the silent courtroom. Trey promised me $500,000 from the insurance payout. He gave me the exact route the limousine would take from the wedding reception. He told me exactly which intersection had the blind spot. He said Marcus had to die. The audio recording hit Trey like a physical, crushing blow to the chest. His knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the wooden pew to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. Calvin dropped his Bible. The heavy book hit the carpet with a dull, hollow thud. The hypocritical church deacon stared at his son in law, absolute paralyzing horror washing over his wrinkled face. He finally realized the massive, bloody scope of the conspiracy his family had entangled themselves within. "That is a lie!" Trey shrieked, his voice pitching into a hysterical, desperate register. He pointed a shaking finger at the tablet. "That is a fake recording. She fabricated it using her tech companies. She is trying to frame me because I took control of the estate. You cannot believe a single word of that audio." The district attorney stepped forward, pulling a thick, sealed warrant from his leather briefcase. That audio recording was obtained directly from the Fulton County Police Department interrogation logs, Mr. Washington. We have the driver full signed confession. We have the cell phone tower geolocation data placing your burner phone at the exact same motel where the driver was hiding. We have the financial records showing your massive unpayable gambling debts to the syndicate. And we have the text messages you sent to your wife bragging about the imminent life insurance payout hours before you illegally attempted to seize Mrs. Sterling estate. The trap had officially sprung shut. "You thought you could run, Trey," I said, letting the absolute reality of his complete destruction settle deeply into the silent courtroom. "There is absolutely nowhere left for you to hide. Now, the most powerful lesson from this story is that your worth is never defined by how toxic people treat you, even if they share your blood." Nia was constantly underestimated and abused by those who should have protected her. When they revealed their ultimate greed, she did not surrender. She used her secret independence to establish unbreakable boundaries and deliver absolute justice. Blood does not excuse abuse, manipulation, or betrayal. Real strength lies in building your own success quietly and having the courage to walk away from anyone who views your pain as an opportunity for their own financial gain. If this story of ultimate justice inspired you, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share your own experiences with setting family boundaries in the comments below.